William Vance had just wrapped up a 10-day architectural inspiration retreat in Cabo San Lucas with his mistress. Holding a carefully selected bouquet of champagne roses, he walked up the steps of his elegant San Francisco townhouse, carrying a trace of travel fatigue and a rehearsed perfunctory guilt. The moment he pushed the door open, he had his excuses ready. It would be the usual script and emergency with the new commercial project. His hands were tied, he had no choice but to extend the trip. However, what greeted him was not the exhausted face of his postpartum wife, nor the cries of his newborn son. It was dead silence. Maria, their housekeeper, was in the living room packing up the last of some miscellaneous items into a cardboard box. Seeing him return, her eyes were as calm as a deep pool of water. She spoke slowly. "Mr. Vance, you're back." Mrs. Vance moved out with the baby 15 days ago. William's heart plummeted as if dropping from a high altitude. The air was instantly sucked from his lungs. The champagne roses in his hand exuded a sweet fragrance that now felt incredibly ironic. "What did you say?" He almost thought he had misheard. His brows furrowed, his voice carrying the unquestionable authority he used at his firm. Moved out where? To her parents' house in Connecticut. Maria shook her head, folding the last microfiber cloth and placing it in her cleaning caddy with unhurried precision. "Not to her parents. Mrs. Vance said she found a new place. She asked me to deep clean the house, and then my employment here is finished." William's mind went blank. Sarah, his wife, the woman who had always been gentle, compliant, and seemingly dependent on him, had moved out without a single word while he was on a business trip less than a month after giving birth. This was entirely out of character for her. It sounded like an absurd joke. He sprinted upstairs to the master suite. The walk-in closet that once housed Sarah's clothes and her vanity full of skincare products was completely empty. Only his own tailored suits and crisp dress shirts hung there looking lonely and mocking his return. The faint, comforting scent of lavender that usually lingered around his wife was gone, replaced by the sterile chemical smell of cleaning agents. He rushed down the hall to the nursery. The expensive, handcrafted restoration hardware crib he had picked out himself was empty. The mobile above the bed, the wall decals, the stacks of Pampers and organic formula in the corner, every trace of the child had been wiped clean. The room was so pristine, it looked as if a new life had never entered it. An unprecedented panic gripped him. This wasn't a wife throwing a temper tantrum and running home to her mother. This was a premeditated total evacuation. He immediately pulled out his iPhone and dialed Sarah's number. The receiver only played the cold, automated carrier voice. "The number you have reached is currently unavailable." Once, twice, 3 times. The result was the same. He scrolled through his contacts and called his in-laws. Straight to voicemail. Frustrated, William ran a hand through his hair and violently hurled the bouquet of roses onto the entryway console. Petals scattered across the hardwood floor. He turned to glare at Maria, his tone harsh. "Did she leave a message?" "A letter." Maria's expression remained placid, like a detached bystander. "Mrs. Vance only said you would understand once you got back. She also instructed me to give you this." Maria reached into her apron pocket, pulled out a neatly folded stack of printer paper, and handed it to him. William snatched it, expecting an angry letter of explanation or a tearful list of grievances. However, as he unfolded the papers, his pupils constricted. It wasn't a letter. It was a professionally formatted, highly detailed spreadsheet of his personal financial transactions. It clearly listed every expense from his personal credit card and a joint authorized user card over the past 2 months. From the booking records of the luxury oceanfront suite in Cabo, to the receipts from high-end local restaurants, down to a massive charge at a Cartier boutique in Union Square. The date, time, location, and exact amount of every single transaction were meticulously documented. What chilled him to the bone was a column of annotations running down the right side. Written in a cold, objective tone were notes like couple's romantic getaway package, matching diamond bands, purchase of women's luxury handbag. Every romantic moment he had shared with Chloe Davis on that beach was accurately reconstructed and quantified by this freezing ledger, turning into irrefutable, hard evidence of his infidelity. William felt a shiver shoot from the soles of his feet straight to his scalp. How did Sarah get this? He thought he had been flawless using his private accounts. How did she compile such a comprehensive forensic audit in such a short time? This was not something an ordinary stay-at-home mother could pull off. His eyes fell to the very bottom of the report. There was a single line of small text. "To the ultimate judge, Mr. Vance. All the above expenditures occurred during my late-stage pregnancy and immediate postpartum recovery. I hope your inspiration retreat was fruitful." No signature, but the calm, restrained tone was undoubtedly Sarah's. William stared at the bank statements, his knuckles turning white. His proud rationality and sense of control fractured. He had always thought Sarah was the safest harbor in his life, a woman who no matter what he did outside could be coaxed back with a few soft words and an expensive gift. But the document in his hands was precise and lethal, like a surgical scalpel that instantly sliced open his hypocritical facade. He had forgotten who Sarah was before they married. She wasn't just a housewife. She had been a star senior auditor at one of the Big Four accounting firms, specializing in finding the deepest hidden rot in seemingly perfect financial statements. For the sake of their family, she had given up her career to support him. He had grown so used to her docility that he had forgotten how sharp her blade could be. And now the blade he had kept sheathed had finally been unsheathed. "Maria," he forced down the shock in his chest, his voice hoarse. "When did my wife start acting out of the ordinary?" Maria thought for a moment. "Probably the day after you left for Mexico." Mrs. Vance received a phone call. After that, she went completely silent. She didn't cry or scream. She just held the baby boy and looked at him for a long, long time. Then she started making calls to the moving company and to a lawyer. A lawyer. William's heart skipped a beat. The severity of the situation had far exceeded his expectations. This wasn't just a wife leaving home. This was a planned, step-by-step legal strike. He rushed into his home office, flipped open his MacBook, and tried to log into his online banking portal to check his personal and investment accounts. However, after entering his password, a glaring red warning box popped up on the screen. "Your accounts have been subject to a temporary restraining order and judicial freeze. Please contact your branch or consult your legal counsel." Judicial freeze. The words hit him like a sledgehammer. His real estate properties, his stock portfolios, his mutual funds, all the wealth he had worked so hard to accumulate had been turned into untouchable digital numbers in an instant. Without Sarah's cooperation, he couldn't even move a single dollar to pay for a hotel. He slumped into his leather executive chair, feeling genuine terror for the first time. He could live without Sarah's gentleness, but he couldn't survive without the material empire he relied on. He immediately dialed his private attorney, speaking at a rapid-fire pace to explain the situation. The lawyer on the other end listened, fell silent for a long time, and then spoke with a grave tone. "William, the situation is probably worse than you think. If opposing counsel successfully petitioned a judge for an ex parte asset preservation order without your knowledge, it means she submitted incredibly compelling evidence. Usually this means the judge believes there is an imminent and massive risk of you hiding, transferring, or dissipating marital assets." Compelling evidence. The spreadsheet of his affairs flashed through William's mind. But he didn't believe a few luxury purchases could justify freezing his entire life. "Yes," the lawyer continued. "For example, proving that you transferred large sums of cash to a third party with no direct relation to you or using marital funds to purchase real estate or luxury vehicles for a third party." "William, have you done anything like that?" Cold sweat broke out on William's hand, gripping the phone. He thought of Chloe. To keep her happy, he hadn't just co-signed the lease for her luxury apartment in Soma. He had given her a joint credit card for her daily splurges. Just last month, he had transferred a $50,000 project bonus directly into Chloe's checking account under the guise of a loan. He thought these transactions were untraceable. Just then, his phone screen lit up with an iMessage from an unknown number. He opened it, and his heart nearly stopped beating. It was a photograph. The background was the sterile environment of a neonatal intensive care unit NICU. His son, the tiny life he had only seen a handful of times, was lying quietly in an incubator, his tiny body connected to various monitors and IV tubes. His small face looked alarming yellow. Below the photo was a single line of text. "While you were enjoying the sun and sand, your son was fighting for his life here with severe acute hemolytic jaundice. The doctors said if I had brought him in even half a day later, he would have suffered irreversible brain damage." In that split second, all his anger, confusion, and panic were drowned by a massive, suffocating wave of guilt. Before his business trip, Maria had mentioned the baby looked a little yellow. But his mind had been completely consumed by the upcoming tropical getaway. He had just brushed it off, saying newborn jaundice is normal. Just put him near the window for some sunlight and tossed the matter to the back of his mind. He had never imagined that his negligence had almost cost his child his life. He shot up from the chair, grabbed his car keys, and sprinted for the door. He didn't care about the money or the firm anymore. He just wanted to see his son. He needed to see Sarah. He had to explain to apologize to salvage everything. But as he reached the entryway, Maria stepped in his path. She handed him one last item. "Mr. Vance, Mrs. Vance, asked me to give you this last piece of evidence." It was a sleek silver USB flash drive. William stared at the drive in Maria's hand, an ominous premonition rising in his chest. His hands trembled as he plugged it into his laptop and clicked the single audio file on the drive. A familiar yet foreign voice drifted from the speakers. It was Chloe's voice, dripping with flirtatious pride and provocation. "Sarah, don't misunderstand. Will doesn't not love you. He just needs me. You know he's a top-tier architect. Inspiration is more important to him than his own life. And I bring him that inspiration. He told me that living with you is like staring at a stagnant pool of water, peaceful but utterly boring. I'm the spark that makes him burn again." The background noise in the recording was a bit chaotic, like a busy Starbucks. William could perfectly picture the scene: Chloe sitting across from Sarah, elegantly stirring an iced latte, delivering these soul-crushing words. Then came Sarah's voice, so flat and devoid of emotion it was chilling. "So he asked you to come find me, to tell me to step aside." No, 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 Chloe laughed lightly. "Will is soft-hearted. He doesn't want to hurt you, especially since you just had the baby. He just hopes you can understand. Men, you know, they need some variety. I won't destroy your family. I just want his occasional company, like this trip to Cabo. He said it was to find inspiration for his new commercial design, and you bought it, didn't you? Look at you guarding that house, guarding that crying baby. What do you get? Just his perfunctory attention and less of his time. Meanwhile, I don't have to do a thing, and I get all his passion and generosity. Just last week, he wired me $50,000. He said it was just pocket money. Sarah, tell me, who do you think he really cares about?" The recording cut off abruptly. William stood frozen, as if struck by lightning. The $50,000 he had wired Chloe was a dividend from one of his firm's projects. He had told Sarah the client hadn't paid the final invoice yet. He thought it was a harmless white lie. He never expected it to become the dagger Chloe plunged into his wife's heart. What terrified him even more was that after getting this recording, Sarah didn't cry, scream, or confront him like a normal woman. She didn't show a single trace of abnormality. She simply gathered the evidence in silence, contacted the best divorce attorneys, made all the arrangements for their child, and then right when he was at his most smug and complacent, delivered the most devastating, lethal blow. How much did he really know about this woman? Her cold rationality and endurance were like a massive net that had quietly tightened around his throat while he was completely oblivious. Unable to bear it any longer, he bolted from the house like a madman, got into his Porsche, and sped toward the address of the children's hospital he found online, based on the NICU monitors in the photo. He ran countless red lights, only one thought in his head: find her. I have to find her. Half an hour later, he burst into the waiting area of the neonatal intensive care unit at the UCSF Medical Center. Through the thick glass windows, he spotted that familiar silhouette immediately. Sarah was wearing a simple white button-down shirt and blue jeans. Her postpartum figure still looked a bit frail, but her back was perfectly straight. She was deeply engrossed in a conversation with a doctor in a white coat, holding a small notebook and jotting things down. In the fluorescent light of the hospital corridor, her profile looked extraordinarily calm and resolute. This wasn't the soft-spoken, smiling wife in his memory. This was an entirely unfamiliar woman radiating an overwhelming aura of strength. He rushed over, slamming his hands against the glass to get her attention. Sarah, please listen to me." Sarah seemed to hear the commotion. She turned her head slowly. Her gaze crossed the glass and landed on his frantic face. In her eyes, there was no anger, no resentment, not even a ripple of emotion. There was only an abyss of dark, bottomless ink, as if she were looking at a complete stranger who had nothing to do with her. She just looked at him quietly for 2 seconds, then turned her head back and continued discussing their son's condition with the doctor, acting as if William simply did not exist. This absolute total erasure was more despair-inducing than the most violent argument. William felt all the strength drain from his body. He slumped weakly against the cold wall. Right then, his phone rang. It was his lawyer, David, sounding incredibly urgent. "William, it's a disaster. I just received a supplemental filing from opposing counsel. Your business partner Bob Hayes just filed evidence with the court on behalf of your firm. He is officially accusing you of corporate embezzlement and breach of fiduciary duty." Corporate embezzlement. William's brain buzzed completely, unable to process the meaning of those words. He and Bob had been frat brothers in college. They had built their architectural firm from the ground up together. Over 15 years of friendship, they were practically blood. How could Bob turn around and accuse him? How is that possible? Bob would never. "William, calm down and listen to me," David interrupted, his tone unprecedentedly severe. "The evidence they submitted is ironclad. It includes bank statements showing you falsified project expenses and forged procurement contracts to funnel company funds into your personal accounts. The largest single transaction is the $50,000 you recently transferred to a Miss Chloe Davis. Opposing counsel is arguing that money was never your personal dividend, but funds embezzled from an ongoing project management budget. William felt like he had been plunged into an ice bath. To satisfy Chloe's ever-growing appetite for luxury, he had indeed resorted to some shady accounting, exploiting his position to doctor the books on a few projects. He thought he had smoothed it over flawlessly, believing not even the firm's internal accountant could spot the discrepancies. But he had forgotten what Sarah did for a living before she married him. She was a star auditor. Her specialty was extracting the most deeply hidden parasites from seemingly perfect financial ledgers. After marriage, she had willingly stepped behind the curtain to be his support. He had grown so used to her docility that he forgot her brilliance, and now the blade he had forced into retirement had been unsheathed. Bob couldn't have missed those books. Why is he only doing this now? William muttered to himself, unable to accept the betrayal of his best friend. William, that's exactly the point. David's voice sounded defeated. My guess is your wife went to Bob first. She showed him the preliminary evidence of your embezzlement. As a partner, if Bob knew and didn't report it or worse covered it up, he'd be facing criminal liability and the loss of his own license. Faced with saving the firm and his own future, he had no choice. Your wife executed a flawless decapitation strike. She completely severed your last remaining ally. William's phone slipped from his hand, the screen shattering on the hospital floor. He finally understood Sarah's master plan. She didn't just want a divorce. She didn't just want to split the assets. She was using her professional expertise to execute a legal, precise, and utterly destructive siege against him. First, she used the credit card statements and the audio recording to establish a concrete case of marital infidelity and dissipation of assets, successfully getting a TRO to lock down his personal wealth. Then she used her skills as an auditor to uncover his corporate fraud, weaponizing it to turn his own business partner against him, fundamentally destroying his career and his primary source of income. Every step was interconnected. Every strike was fatal. As he stood there, a hollow shell of a man, his Apple Watch buzzed. It was Chloe calling. Her voice was shrill and panicked. Will, why is my Amex declined? I was at the Louis Vuitton store in Union Square, and the cashier told me insufficient funds in front of everyone. Do you know how humiliating that was? And that $50K you wired me? The bank just called and said, the funds are frozen, pending a fraud investigation. What the hell is going on? Listening to the obnoxious screeching on the other end, William felt a profound sense of disgust for the first time. The vanity and entitlement he had once found endearing now sounded incredibly stupid and grating. All my accounts have been frozen by the court, he said, exhausted. The line went dead silent for a few seconds, followed by an even higher-pitched shriek. Frozen? Then what about my rent? What about my allowance for next month? Will, didn't you say you were this powerful, successful architect? How could you let this happen, William couldn't form a single sentence. I don't care, this is your problem. You need to fix this right now or else. Or else we are done, Chloe snapped, and the call disconnected with a harsh beep. Staring at his shattered phone on the floor, William let out a miserable, hollow laugh. This was his so-called inspiration and spark. The moment he could no longer provide material satisfaction, the only thing left burning was himself. He looked up, gazing through the NICU window again. Sarah had finished talking to the doctor and was standing quietly by the incubator looking down at their son with profound tenderness. There was no triumphant joy of victory on her face, no thrill of revenge. There was only a relieved peace, as if she had simply completed a necessary and difficult task. Suddenly, the work phone in his jacket pocket vibrated. He pulled it out. It was a new email from Sarah's attorney. The subject line read, Draft Settlement Agreement regarding Mr. William Vance's embezzlement case. He opened it and quickly scanned the contents. The terms were brutally simple. Sarah would agree not to pursue civil action for the dissipation of marital assets or press for maximum criminal sentencing, provided he agreed to an incredibly draconian divorce settlement. He had to forfeit 90% of all joint marital assets, including their Marin County house and all stock portfolios. His equity in the architectural firm would be transferred to Sarah at rock-bottom valuation as restitution for the embezzled funds. The only things he was allowed to keep were his car and a meager checking account. Furthermore, he was required to pay maximum child support until the child turned 18. This wasn't a divorce. This was a financial execution. At the bottom of the email was a message passed along from Sarah's lawyer, Mr. Vance. My client wishes to convey that she is not doing this out of revenge, but simply to reclaim what rightfully belongs to her and her son, including everything you borrowed from this family and the company you co-founded. You have 24 hours to consider. If you refuse, you will face 2 massive lawsuits and up to 10 years in federal prison. Tick, tock. The analog clock on the hospital wall sounded like a grim reaper's countdown hammering against William's already shattered nerves. He looked up, staring in despair at the silhouette behind the glass. He knew this wasn't an empty threat. If Sarah said she would do it, she would. Just then, the NICU doors hissed open. Sarah walked out slowly. She walked right past him, not giving him a single glance. William lunged forward, grabbing her arm, his voice a hoarse, desperate beg. "Sarah, please, I'm begging you. Can we just talk? For the baby's sake." Sarah finally stopped. She turned her head slowly, looking him dead in the eye for the first time. Her gaze was as cold as ice. She enunciated every word clearly. "William, when you were off partying on a beach with another woman, completely ignoring your critically ill newborn son, you lost the absolute right to ever use the word baby in my presence again." With that, she easily shook off his hand and walked toward the end of the corridor without looking back. Her posture was resolute and unyielding every step, stomping on the shattered remains of William's heart. He watched her disappear around the corner, his legs finally giving out. He slid down the wall and collapsed onto the cold linoleum floor. He knew his life from this moment on was completely over. He thought he was just losing a wife. He now realized he had lost his entire universe. And the architect of this destruction was none other than himself. Sitting paralyzed on the freezing hospital floor, William felt every ounce of strength drain from his bones. The smell of hospital disinfectant stung his nose, making him nauseous. He had lost. A total crushing defeat with no room left to even struggle. His proud career, his meticulously built financial empire, the relationships he thought he held securely in his hands, all annihilated overnight. And the person who single-handedly orchestrated this demolition was the wife he had deemed the weakest and least threatening. The email glaring on his phone screen was his final ultimatum. 24 hours. He had 24 hours to decide whether to spend the rest of his life impoverished or behind bars. He forced himself up from the floor, moving like a walking corpse, staggering out of the hospital. He didn't go home. That empty, sterile house would only suffocate him further. He didn't go to the firm. He had no face left to see Bob or the employees who once respected him. He drove aimlessly through the San Francisco traffic. The neon lights reflected off his pale, bloodless face. He used to love this city. Here he had gone from a broke architecture student to a celebrated wealthy designer. He thought he owned this city. Now he realized he was just a loser, about to be swept out with the trash. Subconsciously, he drove to Chloe's luxury apartment building in Soma. He didn't know why he came here. Maybe he just needed someone to talk to. Maybe he was desperately seeking a shred of comfort in the passion he had been so addicted to. He took the elevator up and used his spare key to unlock the door. Greeting him was not Chloe's embrace, but a living room that had been stripped almost bare. Several large Rimowa suitcases lay open on the floor. Chloe was frantically stuffing designer handbags and clothes into them. Seeing him enter, Chloe froze for a second. A flash of panic crossed her face, quickly replaced by a defensive glare. "What are you looking at? You're bankrupt." "Why would I stay here?" "To starve with you." William looked at her. The last illusion in his heart, shattering into dust. The expensive gifts he had showered her with were now just assets she was desperate to pack up and flee with. This woman who had repeatedly claimed she loved him for him and not his money, chose to abandon him the second he fell from grace. "Didn't you tell her that you loved me as a person, not for my bank account?" William let out a self-deprecating chuckle. "Yeah, I loved you. But can love pay the rent?" Chloe sneered, not even looking up as she shoved a diamond necklace into a velvet box. "Will, don't be naive. I'm a 20-something girl in the prime of my life. Why on earth would I suffer with a middle-aged man? What I wanted was a better lifestyle. You can't provide that anymore, so we're done." Her words were like poison-laced daggers striking perfectly into his already mutilated heart. Suddenly, everything felt absurd. For this woman, he had betrayed the wife who had built his life with him, abandoned his newborn child, and embezzled corporate funds to destroy his own career. "That $50,000 I wired you was stolen company money. It's dirty. If you take it, aren't you afraid of being charged as an accessory?" he reminded her coldly. Chloe's hands stopped instantly. Her face paled. She quickly dug into a purse, pulled out a Bank of America debit card, and threw it at his feet. The card is right there. The PIN is your birthday. I haven't touched a dime of that specific transfer. There we're even. Don't ever contact me again. With that, she zipped up her heavy suitcases and dragged them out the door, leaving William with only the sight of her back. Left alone in the echoing empty apartment, William picked up the debit card and laughed soundlessly. This was the fire and passion he had sacrificed everything for. It came fast and it left faster, leaving nothing but ashes. His phone vibrated again. His lawyer. William, time is running out. What's your decision? If you drag this out and the DA officially files charges, it's over. William took a deep breath, using his last bit of energy to speak. Tell opposing counsel. I agree. I'll sign. The moment he made that decision, he felt his soul leave his body. He lost and he accepted it. Perhaps leaving with nothing was the lightest penalty he could pay for his arrogance and betrayal. The next day, accompanied by David, William signed the humiliating divorce settlement. Watching his signature dry on the paper, he felt that the first half of his life had been concluded with a messy, pathetic period. Walking out of the law office, the California sun was blinding. He stood aimlessly on the sidewalk, unsure of where to go. He had lost his home, his career, and his wealth. He thought of the child still in the hospital. That was his only flesh and blood, his only remaining connection to the world. Driven by an invisible force, he drove back to the hospital. This time, he didn't go to the NICU. Instead, he went to the hospital's records department. Using an old favor from a doctor, he knew he begged to see his son's medical files. When he held the thick manila folder and turned the pages one by one, his hands began to shake uncontrollably. The file detailed the entire process from the baby's birth to the emergency admission. He read that on the third day after birth, Sarah noticed the abnormal jaundice levels and consulted a pediatrician. The doctor suggested observation. On the fifth day, an anxious Sarah paid out of pocket to take the baby for comprehensive blood work. The results showed dangerously high hemolysis indicators. The doctor recommended immediate hospitalization, but the pediatric ward was full. From that day on, Sarah drove back and forth between their house and the hospital every single day, holding the baby, monitoring the bilirubin levels, waiting for a bed to open up. Those were the exact days he was in Cabo with Chloe sipping margaritas on the beach. On the 10th day, the baby's condition rapidly deteriorated, the jaundice index skyrocketing to critical levels. Sarah made a split-second decision, signing the critical condition waivers and rushing the baby into the NICU for emergency intervention. The attending physician's notes read clearly, "Patient arrived just in time." A delay of a few more hours would likely have triggered bilirubin encephalopathy, causing irreversible neurological damage. And on the signature lines for parent, guardian consent, Sarah's name was signed over and over, lonely and desperate. The line for father's signature remained entirely blank. William turned the pages, and the tears he had been holding back finally broke the dam streaming down his face. He had always thought Sarah's revenge was fueled by the anger of a scorned woman over his infidelity. Now he understood. The final straw that broke her wasn't his cheating. It was his complete disregard for their child's life. When she was running through hospital corridors alone, clutching their dying baby, signing documents that could mean life or death, he was thousands of miles away romancing another woman. This bone-deep, agonizing despair was the true reason her heart had turned to stone. He stumbled out of the records room, his mind in chaos. Just then, at the end of the hallway, he saw Sarah. She was holding their baby, who had finally been discharged, wrapped in a soft blanket, sleeping soundly. Sarah looked exhausted, but her face radiated a newborn joy and peace. He instinctively took a step forward, wanting to rush over to look at his son, to say he was so sorry. But as he took that step, a gentle, distinguished-looking man quickly walked up to her. The man naturally took the baby from Sarah's arms with one hand and gently supported her elbow with the other. William recognized him. It was Dr. James Carter, a renowned pediatric specialist and Sarah's former senior from her university days. James looked down at the baby with tender eyes, then looked up at Sarah and said softly, "Sarah, the worst is over. I've got you both from now on." Sarah looked up at him and smiled, a genuine, heartfelt smile he hadn't seen in years. It was a smile full of gratitude, trust, and a kind of relief William had never provided. In that moment, William froze, feeling like the biggest joke in the universe. His so-called realization, his belief that she had orchestrated a solo, brilliant professional siege, there was a whole other story behind it. He thought Sarah had fought a lone war. Now he saw that in her darkest, most desperate hours, someone had been standing firmly behind her, offering expert medical guidance and a warm shoulder to lean on. A terrifying thought took root in his mind. Was her entire flawless counterattack not just her own plan? That thought wrapped around his heart like poisonous ivy, suffocating him. He stood paralyzed, watching Sarah and Dr. Carter walk out together, getting into a black Range Rover parked at the curb. They moved with the synchronized grace of a real family. William's mind was blank. He remembered James Carter. Back when Sarah was still in grad school, James had clear feelings for her. But back then, William had won her over with aggressive pursuing and the promise of a lavish lifestyle. He thought James was ancient history. He never imagined that the moment he neglected Sarah the most, this man would re-enter her life as a guardian. Looking back at the timeline, the details suddenly clicked. How did Sarah diagnose the severity of the baby's jaundice so quickly and demand emergency care because a top pediatrician was advising her? How did she find the resolve to launch such a lethal legal strike, most likely when she was holding her dying son, feeling completely abandoned? James gave her the strength to see her husband's true colors and sever the tie. Perhaps James had even helped her find the shark divorce attorney. William felt a bone-chilling cold. He thought his betrayal forced Sarah to evolve. Now he realized he was just the catalyst. What truly allowed her to transform was the solid support system that was there to catch her. His punishment was from the very beginning a well-prepared symphony. He didn't lose unjustly. He watched the black SUV merge into traffic and disappear. He felt exiled by the world. He had lost everything he thought he owned. And Sarah, after leaving him, had clearly found a much better world. The following days were pure purgatory for William. He moved out of the multi-million-dollar mansion that symbolized his success and into a cramped $2,000 a month studio apartment in Oakland. Thanks to his forfeiture of equity and repayment of funds, Bob decided not to press criminal charges for the embezzlement. But William's reputation in the Bay Area architectural scene was completely radioactive. No reputable firm would touch him. He was forced to sell his Porsche and lived off his meager remaining savings. He tried taking on freelance design gigs, but the wealthy clients who used to worship him now avoided him like the plague. Plunging from the clouds into the mud, he tasted the true bitterness of human fickleness. Chloe had vanished without a trace. His fair-weather friends stopped returning his calls. He began suffering from chronic insomnia, his mind replaying fragments of the past on an endless loop. He remembered when he first met Sarah wearing a white blouse, quietly reading in the library. He remembered her tearful "I do" at their wedding. He remembered her heavily pregnant standing in the kitchen making him a late-night snack. Those mundane moments he had once taken for granted, even found boring, were now luxury memories he could never buy back. He finally realized that what he destroyed wasn't a stagnant pool, but the most precious treasure of his life. He began to miss his son with a physical ache. The tiny life he had barely held. Per the divorce decree, he transferred his child support payments on time every month, but he had no idea how the boy was doing. Was he growing tall? Was he smiling yet? Several times he drove to the affluent suburb where Sarah's parents lived, parking down the street hoping for just a glimpse. But he never succeeded. Sarah seemed to have predicted his movements, completely removing the child from his radius of existence. Until one day, 3 months later, he received an unexpected phone call. It was Bob. His voice was complicated, a mix of awkwardness and pity. "Will, where are you? Can we meet up?" William hesitated but agreed. They met at a rundown diner. Bob looked older, more tired. He poured William a cup of coffee, silent for a long time before speaking. "The firm is fully under Sarah's control now. She brought in a professional management team. Honestly, it's running better than when we were in charge." William's hand paused on his coffee mug. He said nothing. "I know you hate me," Bob sighed. "But when Sarah slapped those ledgers on my desk, I had no choice. It was either the firm goes under and we both go to federal prison, or I sacrifice you to save the company and the 40 employees working for us." "I understand," William said hoarsely. At this point, he didn't have the right to hate anyone. "Actually, I'm here on someone else's behalf." Bob pulled a thick manila envelope from his briefcase and pushed it across the table. "Sarah asked me to give this to you." William froze. He thought that besides the sterile bank transfers for child support, their lives would never intersect again. With trembling hands, he opened the envelope. It wasn't a legal document. It was a stack of photographs, pictures of his son. There were professional, 100, day milestone photos, the baby wearing a tiny tuxedo smiling brilliantly, photos of him crawling on the grass, his chubby hands grabbing blades of green, and a photo of the boy in a stroller with Sarah crouching beside him, looking at him with absolute radiant love. Every photo documented the child's growth and Sarah's happiness as a mother. And tucked at the very back of the stack was a small index card. On it in Sarah's elegant handwriting was a single sentence: "He is doing very well. I hope you can start a new life too." William's tears broke free, dropping onto the diner table. That stack of photos became the only faint light in William's dark world. He kept them in a protective box, looking at them every single night. Seeing his son's innocent smile seemed to soothe the agonizing regret in his chest. Sarah's message, "I hope you can start a new life too," was a distant blessing and a final farewell. He understood she had completely let go of the past and started a brand new chapter with their son. And he too had to drag himself out from the wreckage he had created. He stopped aiming too high. He abandoned his delusions of making a glorious comeback. He buried the ego of a top-tier designer and planted his feet firmly on the ground. He got a job at a small, unglamorous home remodeling contractor in the East Bay, starting as a basic drafting assistant. His coworkers didn't know his past. They just thought he was a down-on-his-luck, middle-aged guy. Every day, he drew basic floor plans, drove out to dusty residential job sites, took measurements, and supervised plumbing and electrical upgrades. The work was grueling, and the pay was a fraction of what he used to spend on a single dinner. But for the first time in his life, he felt a grounding sense of reality. Every evening, returning to his tiny apartment, he would cook a simple meal, then open architectural textbooks, relearning the fundamentals he used to scoff at. He discovered that when he stripped away the flashy inspiration and pretentious concepts, returning to the core of architecture, providing a safe, comfortable, and practical living space for humans, he rediscovered his love for design. He stopped chasing avant-garde facades. Instead, he focused on eco-friendly materials, logical spatial flows, and whether a kitchen counter's height actually suited the person cooking. His designs were no longer about feeding his ego. They were about serving life. 6 months later, the contractor took on a nightmare project. A client bought a house with a bizarre layout full of load-bearing walls and terrible natural light. Several designers had failed to produce a viable plan. The project manager was pulling his hair out. William quietly took the blueprints and studied them for 3 days. On the third day, he handed over a complete remodel proposal. He didn't suggest knocking down half the house. Instead, through the clever use of mirrors, reshaping non-load-bearing walls, and a masterclass in lighting design, he maximized the space and light. Every detail came with rigorous structural calculations and material specs. It was highly professional and airtight. The project manager and the client were stunned. The client approved it on the spot. That project made William a legend within the small company. The boss started handing him major residential remodels. Slowly, his life got back on track. He continued to pay child support on the first of every month, but he never tried to intrude on Sarah's life. He knew that staying away was the only good thing he could do for them. 2 years flew by. William was now the lead designer at the remodeling firm. He didn't chase fame anymore. He focused purely on the work. His designs gained incredible word of mouth among homeowners for being highly functional, professional, and full of empathy for the residents. One day, while drafting in his office, the receptionist called his extension. "William, there is a Dr. James Carter here to see you." William's heart dropped. Dr. Carter. He walked out to the lobby and opened the door to the conference room. Sure enough, sitting there was the man he would never forget. James looked the same as he did 2 years ago, distinguished, calm, and composed. Seeing William enter, he stood up and extended a hand politely. "William." "Hello. I apologize for the unannounced visit. I hope I'm not interrupting." William shook his hand stiffly, his mind racing with defense and confusion. "Dr. Carter, what brings you here? It's Sarah. She wants to see you," James said directly. William's head snapped up, shock in his eyes. Sarah wanted to see him. Why is she okay? "How is Leo?" he asked instinctively. "They are both doing wonderfully," James smiled softly, a genuine open smile. "William, I know you might have some misconceptions about my role in the past, so I felt I should clear the air before you meet her." He paused, then continued. "When Sarah discovered the affair and Leo was in the NICU, I was indeed there to support her. But from start to finish, whether it was auditing your firm's books or executing the divorce strategy, every single decision was hers alone. I merely offered medical advice for Leo and the comfort a friend provides. She is far stronger and more independent than you ever realized." William fell silent. So his paranoia had just been his own pathetic projection. Because he was capable of deceit, he assumed everyone else was conspiring against him. She wants to meet today because there is a critical decision that requires your consent. James's expression turned serious. About Leo, William's chest tightened. Is he sick? No, please don't worry. Leo is perfectly healthy, James reassured him. It's something else. Sarah and I are getting married. After the wedding, I want to give Leo a complete unified family. I want to legally adopt him. The word adopt hit William like a wrecking ball. He knew U.S. law. If he consented to a step-parent adoption, his parental rights would be permanently terminated. Legally, he would become a total stranger to his own flesh and blood. To process the adoption, the court requires the voluntary termination of parental rights from the biological father. Sarah has agreed. Now we need your signature. James pulled a thick legal document from his briefcase, consent to adoption and termination of parental rights. William stared at the paper, his hands shaking violently. He wanted to refuse. He wanted to scream, no. That was his son. Why should he give him to another man? But what right did he have to refuse? For the past 2 years, it was James who was there. James watched Leo take his first steps. James heard him say his first words. When Leo spiked a fever at 2 a.m., it was James who held him in the waiting room. And what had William, the biological father, done? Aside from cold, automated bank transfers, what had he contributed? He didn't even have the right to hold his own child. James seemed to read his agony. He spoke gently, William. I know how cruel this feels. But please think about it from Leo's perspective. He is over 2 years old now. He's starting to understand the world. Soon he's going to go to preschool and he'll ask why other kids have a daddy living with them and why his daddy only exists in a few photographs. I want to adopt him not to rob you of anything, but to give him a legitimate, complete childhood without the confusion and stigma. He will have a mother who loves him fiercely and a father who treats him as his own. He will grow up in a home full of love. James took a breath. And we won't lie to him. When he's old enough to understand, we will tell him the truth. We will tell him he has a biological father who cared about him enough to make the hardest choice. When that day comes, whether he wants to seek you out will be entirely his decision. James's words were sincere and earnest. There was no arrogance, no coercion. Every word was centered entirely on what was best for the child. Compared to that, William's own possessiveness and reluctance felt incredibly selfish and hollow. He closed his eyes in agony. He knew James was right. A stable, loving two-parent household was crucial for a child's development. He could no longer provide that. What right did he have to stop someone else from giving it to his son? He had already ruined enough. He couldn't let his ego ruin his child's future. I need to see her, William said, his voice cracking. I want to hear it from her. James nodded, understanding completely. Of course. She is waiting for you at the coffee shop downstairs. William adjusted his collar, took a deep breath, and walked out of the conference room. Every step felt like walking on glass. Inside the cafe, Sarah was sitting by the window. 2 years had passed and she looked different yet the same. She had cut her hair into a sleek professional bob and wore a sharp, tailored blazer. She exuded the confidence and grace of a highly successful woman, but her eyes were just as clear and calm as before. Seeing William approach, she didn't stand up, simply gesturing to the seat across from her. How have you been? William sat down suddenly at a loss for words. I've been very good. Sarah's tone was even like talking to an old acquaintance. The architectural firm is thriving. Leo is adorable. And you, Bob, tells me you're doing well at your new job. I survive, William smiled bitterly. It pays the rent. A brief silence fell between them. James told you everything, Sarah broke the quiet. William nodded, his eyes locked on her. Is this really what you want? Sarah met his gaze without flinching. William, we both need to look forward. I let go of the past a long time ago. My only priority now is giving Leo the best possible environment to grow up in. James. He is wonderful to Leo. And Leo adores him. When they're together, they are a real father and son. So you want to completely erase my existence as his father? William finally broke a hint of accusation bleeding into his voice. Sarah shook her head, a complex emotion flashing in her eyes, pity, but mostly an unshakable resolve. I'm not erasing you. I am protecting him. I don't want him growing up under the shadow of a broken home. I don't want him dealing with the whispers of other parents at school. I don't want him struggling to understand why his daddy doesn't live with us. William, ask yourself, in the past 2 years, other than wiring money, have you fulfilled a single duty of a father? Do you know his favorite toy? Do you know what foods he's allergic to? Do you know if he reaches out with his left or right hand when he falls? Every question was a needle in William's heart. He couldn't argue because it was all true. Giving him a complete family is the only thing I can do for him right now. So I am begging you one last time. Sarah's tone softened, but her stance was immovable. Let us go. Let him go. William looked at her for a very long time. In her eyes, he couldn't find a single trace of the love she once had for him. There was only the fierce protective determination of a mother. He knew he had zero justification to hold on. He picked up the pen James had left on the table. Hands trembling, he signed his name on the consent to termination of parental rights. The moment the ink dried on the final letter, he felt the very last thread connecting him to this world snap. After a long silence, William slid the legal document back across the table. It felt as if the action had drained his life force. He didn't look at her again. He stood up and turned to leave. William! Sarah called out to him. He stopped but didn't turn around. Thank you. Her voice came from behind him. It was quiet but incredibly clear. As compensation, the equity you forfeited in the firm. I am going to have it appraised at current market value and wire the cash equivalent to your account. It's what you earned building the company. William's body stiffened. He let out a self-deprecating laugh and shook his head. Still facing the door, he muttered, "No need. Consider it my final gift to Leo." With that, he pushed open the glass door of the cafe and walked out into the California sun. The sunlight was bright, but he couldn't feel any warmth. He went back to his apartment, locked the door, and didn't come out for a full day. He didn't cry. He wasn't angry. He just sat in silence, his mind a void. He felt like an empty husk floating in space. By evening, his phone pinged with an alert from Chase Bank. A massive wire transfer had cleared into his account. He knew Sarah had ignored his refusal and sent the buyout money for his shares anyway. Staring at the long string of zeros, he found it deeply ironic. He had spent half his life fighting for this kind of wealth. Yet after losing everything that actually mattered to get it, the money had circled back to him in the form of a severance package for his life. What could he do with this money? Buy back the mansion. The house had no family in it. Start a new architecture firm. He no longer possessed the ruthless ambition and ego for it. The next day, William made a decision. He submitted his resignation to the remodeling company. Then he used the buyout money to purchase a modest single-story house with a massive backyard in Sonoma County, deep in the wine country. He didn't return to architecture. Instead, he threw himself into horticulture and landscaping. He dedicated all his time to that plot of land. He tilled the soil, planted seeds, watered, and fertilized. He cared for the plants with the meticulous attention one would give a child. He grew accustomed to the silence of plants, finding a rhythm in the quiet pulse of nature. Watching a seed sprout, watching a sapling reach for the sun. His restless, turbulent heart miraculously found peace. He stopped reading financial news or industry magazines. He cut ties with everyone from his old circles. He lived the life of a modern hermit. He took the box holding Leo's baby photos and the photocopy of his relinquished parental rights and locked them away in a drawer. He told himself that chapter of his life was permanently closed. What he didn't know was that while he was finding peace in the soil, Sarah was keeping her own promises. Sarah hadn't rushed into marriage with James. After securing William's signature, she used the exact amount of the buyout money, the funds William had originally refused to seed a non-profit organization. She named it the Phoenix Initiative. Serving as the executive director, Sarah used her financial expertise and network to help women who had experienced severe marital financial abuse or betrayal. She provided legal grants, taught them how to track hidden assets, offered psychological counseling resources, and helped them re-enter the workforce to gain financial independence. Her story caught the attention of a major news outlet. The resulting profile generated massive public response. People were moved by her resilience, her intellect, and her compassion. The Phoenix Initiative received massive influxes of donations, helping thousands of women across the country. Sarah became an icon of female empowerment. She was no longer defined as someone's wife or someone's mother. She was simply Sarah, independent, powerful, and radiant. William was completely oblivious to all this. He had walled himself off from the world, until one day a year later, he was at a local nursery in Santa Rosa buying rose fertilizer. Browsing the magazine rack near the register, a cover caught his eye. It was Time magazine or a similar major publication. On the cover was Sarah. She was standing in front of her foundation's headquarters, smiling with supreme confidence. Standing slightly behind her, looking incredibly proud, was Dr. James Carter holding the hand of a growing toddler, Leo. The three of them looked like the picture of warmth and harmony. The headline read, "From Betrayal to Empowerment: How Sarah Vance Turned Her Darkest Hour into a Lifeline for Thousands." William stood frozen in the aisle for a very long time. He picked up the magazine and turned to her interview. He read about her foundation. He read the letters from women she had saved from destitution. He read her philosophy on independence and rebirth. "I don't hate him," Sarah was quoted in the article. "In a way, I thank him. He taught me the brutal lesson that a woman's security should never be tied to a marriage or a man. It must come from her own competence and inner strength. Only when I was capable of taking full responsibility for my own survival and building a roof over my child's head with my own 2 hands did I experience true freedom." Reading that, William finally smiled. A genuine, relieved smile. He was truly happy for her. She hadn't let the betrayal consume her with bitterness. She had forged it into armor to protect others. She had grown into a spectacular version of herself he could never have imagined. And seeing that, he felt he could finally truly let it go. Letting go is easy to say, but the healing takes years. William closed the magazine and gently placed it back on the rack. He didn't buy it. His life no longer required peeking into the happiness of others to find its bearing. He drove back to his quiet home in Sonoma. It was a perfect spring day. The climbing roses on his trellis were in full bloom and bees hummed pleasantly in the warm air. He put on his canvas work apron, picked up his pruning shears, and began trimming the overgrowth. The days flowed by peaceful and rhythmic. Through his landscaping, he befriended a few locals who shared his love for the earth. They would sometimes share a beer on the porch, talking about soil acidity and the weather. No one knew about his dramatic past in San Francisco. To them, he was just a quiet, hard-working man with a magic touch for gardens. Occasionally, in the dead of night, he would unlock the drawer and look at the photos. His son was getting older. In his imagination, the boy was losing his baby fat, his features sharpening. He wondered if Leo liked baseball or soccer. He wondered if he struggled with math. But he never tried to find out. He knew he had forfeited that right. This quiet, solitary longing was his penance and his only tether to the love he had lost. 10 years passed. William was now 50 years old. The California sun and physical labor had etched deep lines into his face, and his hair had turned a distinguished silver. But his eyes were clearer and more at peace than they had been in his youth. His boutique landscaping business was highly sought after in the wine country. His custom-bred hybrid roses were famous in local horticultural circles. He remained unmarried, perfectly content with his solitary life, conversing with plants and the changing seasons. One ordinary Tuesday afternoon, he was in the front yard watering a newly planted bed of hydrangeas. The bell on his front gate chimed. He looked up, surprised. He rarely had visitors at this hour. He wiped his hands on his jeans and walked over to unlatch the wooden gate. Standing there was a boy roughly 12 or 13 years old. He wore a crisp, casual button-down shirt and carried a canvas backpack. The boy had facial features that were strikingly, undeniably similar to William's own. Yet his aura was completely different. His eyes were bright, steady, and infused with the kind of polite confidence that only comes from a deeply loving, secure upbringing. William recognized him instantly. Even though he had only seen him as a toddler in photos, his heart slammed against his ribs. His grip on the garden hose tightened involuntarily. "Excuse me, are you Mr. William Vance?" the boy asked. His voice was clear, though it carried a slight nervous tremor. William opened his mouth, but his throat seized. He couldn't make a sound. He could only nod his head firmly. "My name is Leo Carter." "Well, legally Leo Carter, but I know I was born Leo Vance." The boy introduced himself, meeting William's eyes with an open gaze. "My mother is Sarah." William felt a sudden, intense burn behind his eyes. He wanted to say 1,000 things, but his throat felt packed with cotton. "Can I come in and sit for a minute?" Leo asked, gesturing to the lush garden behind William. "Yes, of course. Please come in," William finally managed to croak quickly, stepping aside. Leo walked into the yard, looking around at the explosion of colors with genuine appreciation. He stopped in front of a spectacular deep purple rosebush. "Wow, these are incredible. Are these Rhapsody in Blue? My dad says they're really hard to keep healthy." William was stunned. "You know about roses. My dad loves gardening." "I help him out sometimes," Leo smiled. The dad he referred to was, of course, Dr. James Carter. A sharp pang hit William's chest, but it was quickly washed away by a wave of complex gratitude. The two of them sat down on the wicker chairs on the porch. William poured the boy a glass of homemade iced tea. "How did you find me?" William finally found his voice. "My mom gave me the address," Leo said, taking a sip of the tea. "Actually, I've known about you since I was little. My parents never lied to me. They told me the whole story when I was old enough to understand. They showed me pictures of you. Today. It was my own decision to come. I just wanted to see what my biological father looked like in person." The boy spoke with remarkable maturity. There was no anger, no resentment in his voice. William looked at the son sitting across from him. He was healthy, bright, impeccably polite, and radiated goodness. The very last trace of regret or bitterness in William's soul evaporated into the wind. He knew with absolute certainty that Sarah and James had given this boy a life and a love that he, in his arrogance, could never have provided. Signing those papers 10 years ago was the single best decision he had made in his entire life. "Do you hate me, William?" asked his voice trembling. Leo shook his head. "Mom told me that adult relationships are really complicated and it's rarely just black and white. She said you made a terrible mistake back then. But people make mistakes. What matters is if you learn from them. She told me to never let resentment define me." Leo looked up at William, his eyes holding a wisdom far beyond his years. "Mom also asked me to pass along a message. She said she hopes you're doing well. She told me that knowing you found a peaceful life makes her glad." William couldn't hold it back anymore. The tears spilled over, tracking through the deep wrinkles on his sun-beaten face. All these years, Sarah had been keeping tabs on him. Not to gloat, not to ensure his ruin, but simply hoping he would eventually find his own redemption. She didn't want him erased from the earth. She just wanted him to heal. William choked on a sob, wanting to say "I'm sorry," but knowing the words were far too light to carry the weight of the past. Leo unzipped his backpack and pulled out a small, faded velvet box. He handed it across the table. "Mom said I should bring this to you. She said this was something you refused to take back then." William opened the box with shaking hands. Inside rested a vintage Omega watch. It was the watch Sarah had bought him for his birthday many years ago, using her first major bonus from the accounting firm back when they were young and building their dreams. He had worn it for a while, but as he became wealthier and more arrogant, he found the style outdated and tossed it into a drawer, replacing it with a flashy Rolex. He never realized she had kept it all this time. Engraved on the stainless steel back was a short inscription: "May your life be safe and smooth. S." Clutching the cold metal of the watch, William felt as if he was holding the entire lost first half of his life. He finally broke down, burying his face in his hands, weeping loudly like a child who had been lost for decades and had finally found the way home. Leo didn't interrupt him. The boy simply sat there quietly, a respectful presence. After a while, Leo stood up, walked over to a potted geranium that had been knocked slightly askew by the wind, righted it, and carefully packed the soil around its base. They spent the entire afternoon on that porch. Father and son talked for hours. They talked about plants, about Leo's middle school, about his plans for the future. William shared the hard-earned lessons of his failures, holding nothing back, hoping his devastating mistakes could serve as a guardrail for the boy's life. As the sun began to set, painting the Sonoma sky in brilliant oranges and purples, Leo stood up to leave. "Can I come visit you again sometime?" the boy asked as he strapped on his backpack. William nodded vigorously, tears shining in his eyes as he smiled. "Yes, anytime. The gate is always open." Watching the boy walk down the gravel driveway, William felt an unprecedented, profound sense of peace and completion. He knew his life was defined by a massive, tragic mistake, but he had finally learned to forgive himself and to make peace with the past. He looked down at the vintage Omega in his hand and strapped it onto his wrist. It fit perfectly. The evening breeze swept through the garden, carrying the rich scent of blooming roses. He had lost everything his ego had built, but somehow, at the end of the road, he had found the most important thing of all. Not wealth, not fame, but a belated, quiet redemption born of love and ultimate forgiveness.